and answer session at the end of the talk. You may submit your questions via the chat box at the bottom of your screen. Do include your name and state whether you would like to ask your question in person or have the host ask on your behalf. So good afternoon to Dato Ambiga Sreenevasan, Adjunct Professor of Taylor's Law School, Mr. Hamahinder Singh, Head of School at Taylor's Law School, lecturers, fellow students, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the third dialogue session for 2020. My name is Prashant Lingaraj, and I shall be your MC for the day. To kickstart today's proceedings, we would like to invite Dr. Tamra Joan Duraisingam, Program Director for the PhD program and Senior Lecturer of Taylor's Law School, to introduce our speaker for today, Dato Ambiga Sreenevasan.
Thank you, Prashant, and welcome, Dato Ambiga.
Hi, thank you.
Dato Dr. Ambiga Sreenevasan is a litigation lawyer and is also actively involved in public interest litigation. Throughout the course of her career, Dato Dr. Ambiga has been an advocate of human rights issues and the promotion of rule of law. She is the second woman to serve as President of the Malaysian Bar, serving as its 24th President from March 2007 to March 2009. During her tenure, she played a significant role in establishing a panel of eminent persons to review the 1998 judicial crisis in collaboration with Law Asia, the International Bar Association, Human Rights Institute, and Transparency International Malaysia. Dato Dr. Ambiga also led the March for Justice in Putrajaya, calling for judicial reform and the investigation of the videotapes of the alleged fixing of judicial appointments and judges' case assignments. Her determination and intense lobbying resulted in the formation of a royal commission, which called for corrective actions. Dato Dr. Ambiga has fought relentlessly for freedom of religion, women's rights, and the movement to raise awareness for clean and fair elections, a concept which is close to the heart of every Malaysian. She was a co-chairperson of Bersih 2.0 from 2011 to 2013. She is a patron of Global Bersih, which is the global arm of Bersih 2.0. Dato Dr. Ambiga is a member of the panel of the Asian Regional Center for Arbitration as arbitrator for the term 2016 to 2019, and mediator on the panel of the Bar Council, Malaysian Mediation Center for the term 2016 to 2019. Dato Dr. Ambiga also served as the president of the Human Rights Organization of Malaysia, HAKAM. She has been instrumental in the drafting and presenting of papers and memoranda on justice, legal aid, religious conversion, and on other human rights issues, including the rights of the Orang Asli, and continues as an active member of the Malaysian Bar. Her stellar contributions towards advancing of human rights in Malaysia has earned her international recognition from the United States when she received the United States Secretary of State's International Woman of Courage Award in March 2009, an honorary doctorate for laws from the University of Exeter, UK in July 2011, and the Chevalier, Knight of the Legion of Honor by the French government in September 2011. On 9th July 2018, she was appointed as a commission member of the International Commission of Jurists. In the same year, Dato Dr. Ambiga received a UN award for contribution to sustainable development goals relating to human rights and governance, and closer to home, received her honorary doctorate of humanities from Taylor's University for her stellar contributions towards the advancement of human rights in the Malaysian society. Without further ado, I hand the session over to Dato Dr. Ambiga Sreenevasan.
Thank you so much for that introduction.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Sorry, Dato Ambiga. We will now start a session with first question. So in your address to the tailors community 2 years ago, when you received your honorary doctorate with us, you spoke about the rule of law in Malaysia. And since then, how do you think the contours of the rule of law has changed?
Well, obviously, for 2 years since the PH government was in power, we kept hearing the term the rule of law being used, which was very nice, by the way, because obviously everyone was being made aware that we must act within the confines of the rule of law. And I do believe that the PH government did put some good things in practice, which meant upholding the rule of law. We had some very dynamic appointments. People were gaining more confidence in the independence of our institutions. And, things like there was an amendment to the federal constitution to reduce the voting age to 18. Parliament actually was doing a wonderful job. They had several parliamentary select committees. So we actually saw the Parliament working, because people sat on committees, you had the opposition involved as well. So things were actually coming along quite nicely. That is, of course, until the incident earlier this year when there was a change. But unfortunately, I think once the new government came into power, I started having some reservations about how far we can take this rule of law with the new government. Unfortunately, we don't actually know yet, because very quickly the MCO was imposed, and of course that changes everything. Yeah? So we need to wait to see once the MCO is lifted and so on as to how far we go with that. But I do have some concerns.
Thank you. Leading on from that, what are your thoughts on the recent change of government? As many quarters feel that political stability is key to ensure that we overcome the current pandemic, do you think that the current government offers some sense of that much asked for political stability?
Well, the only place that can be tested, because you need a strong government at this time, I think that there's no doubt about that. But where would you test that? You would test that in Parliament. Unfortunately, that chance to test the majority of the present government was curtailed because they reduced it to a one-day sitting. Now, for me, that is a problem. That is a huge problem for the rule of law. That is a huge problem because Parliament cannot oversee, like the stimulus package, for example. It actually needs the consent of Parliament and so on. And there's going to be no in-depth discussion about the biggest challenge that is facing not just Malaysia, but the whole world, okay? And where our economy is going to suffer. So what are the plans ahead? This is the one time I think they should all join hands. That is the government and the opposition. They must work together because there's, as I've said before, there's only one enemy here, and that's the virus. So to me, that's what I would look for, to have a stable government. Right now, what's going to happen on the 18th, we don't know, okay? We know to some extent that not much can be done because it's just one day. So so far, I mean, they've done all right with with confronting the virus. They have allowed the Director General of Health to take over, who is the expert, which I think is a very wise thing that they're doing. But then you see the opening up, the manner in which, they opened up and allowed people to go back. I'm not sure that, I mean, that gave rise to its own set of problems between the state and the federal government as well. So that's another set of problems. So do we have a stable government? Well, I don't know how to answer that question, to be honest. And I wish we could find out at the next sitting of Parliament. And maybe after that, we will know a little bit more. But you're right. Especially at this time, a stable government is absolutely vital. Yeah.
Thank you. And with the recent change in government, have there been any updates on some of the reforms that were previously discussed? For example, establishing the IPCMC or abolition of the death penalty?
Yeah, I actually think the IPCMC is dead in the water, to be honest. Because even before even before the change, you know that many people from UMNO and PAS and so on were not in favor of the IPCMC. And you know, we were this close, and that is the frustration for me. We were so very close to making that happen. I fear now that that is going to go to the back burner, as are many of the other reforms. So I am very concerned for the reforms. And there's one thing, a little clue as to the way they're going. You know, one of the things that we wanted very badly was that no politicians in GLCs and heading, you know, these important bodies who should be independent. This government has completely changed all that. They've sacked all the independent, you know, the technocrats and the professionals from many of the GLCs and many of the positions, many of whom were women as well. The last government actually gave a lot of voice and space for women. All of that is gone. And instead of that, they have put in politicians, MPs, okay, as if it's like a gift to them. So for me, that doesn't augur well for our future, because obviously they're not going to separate business from politics. And that is a huge mistake, I think, because it means, you know, what we want, transparency and so on, may not be there. So I have a lot of concerns about that.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So, Dato, are there any other concerns that you might have with regards to the recent changes in government and the relative instability that has been seen?
Well, you know, I have got, of course, reservations, because whilst you can't say it was illegal, because it's just, this is coalition politics, huh? Coalitions can change. So that's what happened here. So legally, you can't say it was wrong, but morally, I am very disappointed, because I think when the people came out May 9th, which is tomorrow, by the way, 2 years tomorrow, they made the biggest effort they have ever made, okay? They really threw their heart and soul into those elections. And we picked a coalition. Now that coalition is no longer there. In fact, the whole aim of that coalition was to actually remove other parties. But now 2 years later, they're all back. You know, I'm back. So they say, and they're back in full force with all their policies and their manner of doing things, the way they do things, everything that we fought against. So I think it is a huge disappointment for us. So, but again, you know, they've handled the crisis, the health crisis, reasonably well. But I really fear, because we have seen an authoritarian side coming out. For example, the way they dealt with the Rohingya, and actually even many Malaysians started attacking the Rohingya, which is very sad. And then the way they dealt with the migrants, and the way they were arresting people who breached the MCO, you know, and so much like a quote unquote authoritarian kind of a streak coming out. So I'm hoping that that's temporary and that may change. But all in all, I have a personal disappointment about what's taken place. I don't think it's right. And I fear that people who go to vote the next time around, they're not sure, look, I may vote for this coalition today. Will it be the same tomorrow? You know, you undermine the electoral process when these things happen. So that's unfortunately the way coalition politics goes in this country. Yeah.
Okay, it's interesting that you brought up the issue of the Rohingya. I think that's something we'd like to explore a little. Could you tell us about your opinions on refugees in Malaysia in general and the recent Rohingya crisis as well?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we have to do a lot more for refugees. We don't do enough. And I remember thinking, you know, do you remember about more than a couple of years ago, there was a big movement to support the Rohingya, right? People walked, they gathered at the embassies, and they took a flotilla across to, this is PAS and UMNO, and they made a huge thing about it. And I don't disagree with them, I agreed with them. And they went and delivered food, etc. The same two parties, okay, are taking a different stand today. PAS is completely silent on the way in which the Rohingya have been treated. Now, whether we are facing a crisis or not, it cannot stop us continuing to be humane. The very fact that some of these people were hauled back onto the sea, into the middle of the ocean, rather than given refuge here, really bothered me, because what, have we become monsters overnight, you know, that we can't even see the problems that they're having? So we must work with the UNHCR. We must bring in certain new laws. For example, you know, allowing some of these people to work so that they become productive. What about allowing children to go to school? And by the way, access to health. That is the one thing that has really been made very obvious with this health crisis, that there hasn't been access to health previously. Now we are very concerned about their health. Why? Because we're scared they're going to spread it to us, all right? Very selfish reasons. So maybe we must revisit some of those earlier policies, and I think we must join the UN Convention for Refugees. We must we must comply with international standards, and I think it's not happening.
Yes, of course, totally agreed. I'd also like to ask about your opinions on the possibility of a legislative approach towards curbing party jumping. Would that be something that you would agree with?
You know, I think we may have to look at that. I can tell you previously, it's not something that I would have agreed with, right? Because there's this whole thing about freedom of association, and I think we have cases to say that. But I am so tired of this party hopping, because it is actually making it very difficult for voters who voted. Sometimes they vote for the party, sometimes they vote for the person. You know, and of course, basically they're interested in the end result. So especially in a system like ours, which is first past the post, in other words, winner takes all rather. Party hopping is a serious problem, and there are ways around it. Actually, in England, they have set up, they have solutions to these things. I mean, there must be some so-called punishment for the person who hops, you see, and he must be prepared to face the voters immediately, or you know, as soon as possible. So I am for looking at a model where we discourage party hopping, but we cannot discourage it to such an extent. Say you resign on principle. Say the party, all right, like on the Rohingya issue, let's just say, my party decides that they are going to chase all the Rohingya back, and they're going to hold them out to sea, and I can't agree with that. So I must be allowed to leave, to resign. But there must be a system whereby the people can then decide whether they still want you or not. So that's what I think we should look at. Yeah.
Okay, and also, I'm curious to ask you about what you think about the one-day sitting of Parliament. Is that legal? Is that allowed in Malaysia?
Well, it's not illegal, but it is, to me, it is undermining Parliament. You're making a joke of Parliament, right? So it is absolutely appalling. I'm sorry. It cannot be condoned, because why not? What are you afraid of? Which is why I'm saying, why is the new government so afraid? Is it because they don't feel that they have the majority that they need? But one way or the other, that has to be resolved. And Parliament is also important, not just about the motion of no confidence or whatever. Parliament is important to see us through this very difficult period. It is time they all work together. It is time they found solutions, economic solutions, you know, all these things. And look, one incident, okay, where the federal government lifts the MCO, the states decide they're not going to follow. You see, all these things can be avoided if they all sit and discuss it as a whole. So I think it is absolutely appalling that Parliament is not sitting. And also, don't forget, initially the reason was, oh, because of the health crisis, then we suggested do it remotely, the way we're doing it now, the way they're doing it in the UK. They don't just stop, because institutions don't just grind to a halt. They're finding ways. But now there is no excuse, because it's been lifted. The MCO has been lifted. So you take the precautions of social distancing, etc., etc. Those who don't want to come in or have health reasons should do it remotely. So there's no excuse. So I can't see how the MCO has been lifted for the whole country and everybody can go back to work, but Parliament can't sit. So for me, it's reflective of how confident they are in their own strength, actually, which is a pity, because I think they should all be mature and sensible about these things. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Moving on to the idea of introducing proportional representation in Malaysia. To what extent do you think such a system would work within our country's context, given the fact that it would allow for the possibility of extremist parties rising and gaining momentum in the nation? Okay,
right. Because we are so diverse, there is a place for proportionate representation. The idea of proportional representation is nobody is left out. And I think a lot of communities are left out in our present system because it's all first, as I say, it's winner takes all, and it's a first past the post. So it's either this or it's this. So with proportional representation, you get minorities in there who are able to, also participate. Yes, you will get the odd, the extremists here and there, but you will get others as well. So you can't pick and choose. If they feel that, there are minorities who deserve to be represented in Parliament, this is the way to do it. But I'm not sure that we are anywhere near ready to change the entire electoral system. Look, we haven't even cleaned up our electoral roll. We haven't actually sorted out our elections. So we're a bit of a way away from proportional representation. But yes, I think it's worth looking at. There are many models. So we can actually pick one that is suitable for us.
Okay, and as a lawyer, what do you think of the recent move by the judiciary to allow proceedings to be heard online? And if it is allowed for criminal cases, do you think justice is being served as it should be?
Sorry, do you think, I missed the last bit. Do you think justice
is served as it should be?
Okay, look, here's the thing. I am a big proponent, and let me declare my interest. I am a big proponent of remote hearings. In fact, with a team of lawyers, we sat and wrote out the protocols for remote hearings. And these are the reasons why we must go that way. First of all, many other countries have done it already. Singapore's doing it, the UK is doing it, Hong Kong, and many other countries. We don't know how long this virus health issue is going to carry on. We have to assume that until a vaccine is found, that it's not safe to go back to business as usual. Now, if you walk into court on a Monday morning in Jalan Duta, there are hundreds of lawyers jam-packing the lift, going up and down and up and down. Now, can we go back to that? Right now, can we go back to that? The answer is no. But the court is doing staggered hearings, okay, which means one case fixed per day or two per day. You do that, the backlog is going to build up. Then you've seen the court actually do a live stream. I think you would have seen that, the first of its kind. But those cases are proceeding because the parties consent. Many cases are being adjourned because the parties are not consenting, which is why we think we need rules to force parties to carry on with virtual hearings unless they have good reasons not to. Now, this to me is a new reality, okay? There are many things that can proceed on by way of virtual hearing, like applications, amendments, all those things can be done quite easily on computer. What is a problem is possibly trials. But even that We can actually have formal witnesses, etc. We have actually set out many ways in which you can actually protect even trials done by virtual hearings. But at least some of the business of the courts. So appellate jurisdiction, Court of Appeal, federal court, appeals in the High Court, no reason why you can't do, because it's all by record. It's not trials. So here's the thing. It's about access to justice. Is it fair to your clients to say, look, I don't know how to use all this, and therefore I can't act for you, you know? Or we cannot have a hearing. Is it fair to your client? How long are you going to delay these things? If you look at the criminal side of things, all right, are you going to tell someone, an accused held in prison, that you cannot do a bail application because you don't believe in this virtual hearings? You can't. That means he carries on sitting in jail until you can learn how to use the computer. That's ridiculous. So it's about access to justice. And don't forget, judiciary is the third arm of government. It cannot grind to a halt. And to be fair to the judiciary, they have been trying. And they have been learning how to use the computer. They're all quite good. They've all got iPads. They're moving on. So I'm afraid the lawyers have to move on too. So I am a proponent of this. And I know ideally it is, the gold standard is appearing in court and arguing your case. But until the time we can go back, and we don't know when that is, we must be able to adapt, like other lawyers have. So that's my answer on that, yeah.
And a little bit more on that. With regards to the possible use of artificial intelligence to replace the role of judges, court officers, and practitioners, do you think that this possibility would bring harm, or would it still continue to do justice?
What do you mean by use of artificial intelligence? What are you thinking of?
With regards to, in Sabah, for example, the use of artificial intelligence to decide on sentencing, for example. So is it fair to take the human element out of matters such as that?
No, I think you shouldn't. There's no need to go that far. I still think the human element must be there in making decisions, because it's not mechanical, you know? Sentencing, and of course sentencing, you can do it to a point where you get a guide, but ultimately the judge must make the final decision, you know? So this is all the data crunching that they do. Is that what you're saying? That they have they feed in all the information and then they get a proposed sentence? Well,
yeah.
You know, you can do that as a guide, but ultimately the judge has to make the decision.
Fair enough. Thank you, Dato Ambiga. So now we shall start answering some questions from the floor. Remember, you may still submit your questions via the chat box, and do remember to include your name and state whether you'd like to ask your question live or have me ask it on your behalf.
Sure.
So firstly, Dr. Abdul Karim asks, irrespective of religion, what is our national policy towards refugees from our neighboring countries?
Irrespective of religion. Yeah, no, it should, I think it should be irrespective of religion. What is our policy is we don't really have a policy as far as I can see, because we don't belong to the international regime for refugees. But we do have a UNHCR here. They do issue cards, you know, UNHCR cards. And when they get these cards after interviews and so on, then they can actually, you know, do some work. Now, but what about those who don't get these cards, who are running away, who are in dire circumstances, or whatever the reasons may be that they're here? There is a huge group of them who don't have access to education, who don't have access to healthcare and so on. So as far as I can see, there's no clear policy about refugees. And then you know about undocumented workers. A lot of these people who come in, yes, illegally, but a lot of them are brought in illegally by unscrupulous agents who take their money and tell them, we will get everything done, you just come in on a visitor's visa, then we'll sort everything out, and we will get you a job and we'll get you X, Y, and Z. Many of them run away with these poor people's money. So these people are left stranded through no real fault of their own, you know? And so, so what do? Do you punish them? I mean, the people you need to punish are those who are responsible for border control and those agents, unscrupulous agents. Then, of course, you have economic migrants, people who come here, you know, not because they are under any oppression, but because they want to make more money, etc., etc. That's a different category of people. So you have different guidelines there. So for me, I'm not sure that we do have a policy, you know, for refugees. In fact, I would say we don't. And the stark truth about how we treat refugees has come to the fore when we look at, because of this health crisis. It is only now, if you think about it, when you talk about poverty, for example, did you know so many people were living in such awful conditions until this health crisis? And then you realize, you say stand 6 feet away. Some of them don't live in premises that allow you to stand 6 feet apart. So for a lot of people, this is surprising. Oh my goodness, people are actually living this way. This is the urban poverty issue. So this crisis has opened our eyes to the way in which minorities and vulnerable communities live. The question is whether we take those lessons and we actually make their lives better and do something about it.
Thank you, Dato. The next question will actually be asked by the individual herself. Natalie, would you like to turn on your microphone?
Hi, Dr. Ambiga.
Hi.
Okay. Hello. Yeah, so I'd like to ask about a statement made by maybe Dato Sri Muhammad Asmin Ali. So he actually mentions that the federal government can actually sue the state's government for not following the CMCO. And in your personal opinion, do you think it's unconstitutional if they don't follow?
Okay, two good questions there. The first one, I also thought that the Minister Asmin Ali said federal government can sue the state government. But if you look at the article, what he said is that the businesses in those states can sue their state governments, okay? If they don't follow and open up because their businesses suffer. Now, so that's what I think he meant. This whole thing about state and federal, there are differing opinions. Two very senior lecturers think they cannot. The state cannot go against what the federal government has said. But I have a slightly different view because I actually think that there are three lists, okay? There is a federal list in the federal constitution. You know about that, right? That's within the control and jurisdiction of federal government. There's a state list. All those matters are within the jurisdiction of the state. Then there's a concurrent list, all right, where both have jurisdiction. So I actually think it's arguable that health within the state, they have some jurisdiction, as long as they don't breach the federal government guidelines, okay? So the federal government guideline says, everybody open up. What you are saying, state is saying is, okay, X can open up, but these two have to wait. That is still within the broader guidelines, okay? What they cannot do is, if the federal government says, you must close down everything, and the state government says, no, you can open up and go. That directly conflicts.
Right. Yeah.
So my own view is if it doesn't directly conflict, it's okay. But let me tell you, I'm probably in a minority. In fact, Wayjet, who wrote an article, who's from my firm, feels this. I mean, he's the one who came up with this, and I agree with him. So I think it's arguable. But the best way to handle things like this is to bring everybody into the discussion. So if the federal government is going to impose something like this, please pull everybody on board. They say they did, states say they don't. I don't know what's happening. But that's why I'm saying this is not this time for them to be arguing and fighting with each other. This is the time for everyone to cooperate. So there is an issue, as you've asked, between state and federal. It's interesting, but I can tell you that there are two schools of thought on it as well.
But actually, because I think different states have different cases, like in Selangor, there's a lot of cases, but that's
Right.
in there's like less cases. That's why I think we should have different measures. Yeah, but
You're right. And also across the seas in Sabah, it's different also. You see, some people have a very broad coast that may make a very long coastline, rather, that may make a difference. Some may have more immigration, migrants and so on. Some may have less. So there will be sometimes some differences. Yeah. So I do agree on that as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Natalie. So next we have a question from Megan, who asks, this is in relation to your earlier answer on the issue of party hopping, right? If legislations were to be formulated against party hopping, how will enforcers ensure that this will not be undermined? And are there any other solutions being considered besides legislative measures?
Yes, I think, okay, if I'm not mistaken, and I can't remember this very clearly, you have to check it. But in the UK, they have a system, if I'm not mistaken, or some countries, where if there is party hopping, then it reverts back to the people in the constituency. I think they do a sort of to see whether a certain percentage of the constituency feel that there has to be another election, there will be another election. But if that certain percentage decide we don't want, then they leave it alone, So I think it's that kind of thing is quite effective. I mean, look, enforcement, if the legislation is there, that has to be followed, So the enforcement will come in the solutions that you provide. But it cannot be like you go to jail if you do it. No, not punitive measures. There has to be leeway also, as I told you before, for those who resign on principle. You cannot force them to stay in the party, even if they can't, if they can't, they're not in line with what the party has done. Yeah.
Okay. Our next question comes from James, who asks, there have been allegations that the PN government has been stirring up issues such as on the migrant workers and the Rohingya in order to distract the Rakyat from the unconstitutional acts of government, such as the one-day sitting of parliament. How can we combat these distractions and hold the government accountable on these issues?
Well, yes. I mean, that's a political question. It looks that way, doesn't it? That this is a side issue. And a lot of people have said, look, this is a distraction and so on. It's possible. But to me, Parliament would have been the way to keep them accountable, all right? They've decided they don't want to be accountable right now, and they have made it just one day. But it doesn't mean that we stop speaking up. Although on the migrant issue, Tashni, who is a reporter with the South China Morning Post, was hauled up because she tweeted about what she saw. The way in which they say illegal immigrants were treated at Masjid India, it was like it was so frightening. I mean, is there a need to treat human beings like that who are already afraid because they're away from their homes? And here there's a health crisis. Some of their friends are ill. You put them in handcuffs, you haul them off. Is it necessary? So those are the things. To me, that was the authoritarianism I was talking about. If you notice, there's a lot, it's suddenly come back. They brought in the army, the police, and so on and so forth. Rather than educating the people, they are arresting them. So how do we keep them accountable? We keep speaking up. We never stop speaking up. We don't give any quarters because we've had 2 years of being able to speak our minds. I actually don't think you can put the genie back into the bottle. The genie is out. We're all used to speaking our minds, And I think that's what we must do. We must write critically, write articles critically when it's legal issues. The academia must also play their role. Activists have to play their role. We have to keep pushing back. Otherwise, all the gains that we have made in the 2 years, we will lose. So it's not easy, yeah? It's not easy. And, we're all a bit tired, I think, huh? All very tired of keeping the government accountable. So I know what you mean. But we must push back. And certainly when they ill-treat other human beings, I don't care where they come from or the reasons they are here, there is no reason for us to behave inhumanely. And actually, generally, Malaysians are very humane. You look at the number of people who took food out to the poor and so on and did so much. Malaysians are good people, okay? So when we see that, so I was actually shocked when even ordinary Malaysians, including some of my friends, were very angry with the Rohingya because they came and they say they demanded equal rights. Actually, they didn't. That was a fake news, I suppose you want, if you want to, for want of a better word. And then everybody comes out against them. They're not even in a position to ask for equal rights. They don't even have daily necessities, okay? I don't think equal rights is really what they're looking for. So I think there are some realities we need to face. One is these migrant community, the Rohingya and so on and so forth. The other is the urban poor and all the other small communities like the Orang Asli and so on, whom we have left behind. But, let's see whether this government is even interested in that. I'm not sure.
Okay, our next question comes from Bolade, who asks, do you think a change in the voting system or system of government would be a more stable solution to the current volatile politics in Malaysia? And if so, do you have a proposed model in mind?
Yes, I do think eventually there has to be a change from this first past the post system. It does, you're right, it makes it volatile. Now everything is about politics, okay? People may win elections, the very next day they're talking about the next elections. They're only thinking about election to election to election, and not about serving the people. So the system, I think they should look at, I mean, frankly, there are many, many models. And I think Bersih has come up with several of these models that they can choose, but a mixed proportional representation with the current system is not a bad idea, but I don't see it happening yet for a while. In the meantime, what we need to do is make sure our current elections are clean and fair. And that means the redelineation exercise has to be cleaned up. That means the electoral roll has to be cleaned up. Election laws, which stops you from bribing voters, has to be enforced. And all those things. I'm so worried we're going to go back, to the old days now. And the next elections, you will see this. You see, they even used some of these stimulus packages to promote themselves, putting their face on rice bag and this. And I mean, you do not do that at the expense, when people are miserable, you don't take advantage of that to promote yourself. That's in such bad taste. So you can see some of these bad habits creeping back in. But to your question, and I think you are absolutely right, that the politics in this country is so toxic. They're so poles apart that they cannot even come together and work together in a crisis like this. It shows our lack of maturity. So yes, I think a new system is a good idea. Until then, we should get the current system cleaned up. Yes.
Right. Thank you. Now, another question from Sai, who comments that Keir Starmer of the Labour Party in the UK has recently announced his intent to replace the House of Lords with a second chamber, which has a democratic mandate. In your opinion, should actions also be taken to reform the Dewan Negara? If so, what should they be?
Okay, you can actually, the Constitution allows for a system of elections to the Senate, which I think they should implement. It should be by way of elections. It isn't now. It's states and so on who have certain numbers and they nominate. And that is one way in which they all reward all their friends and cronies and supporters. Senate seems to be the place. So I think we can actually introduce the mechanism of voting. All right, elections for Senate positions. But of course, before we even do that, we need to get our election process correct. Yeah. So I think it's a good idea. Yeah.
Agreed. Okay, so going back to Tashni Sukumaran and her reporting, now recent events have brought to light the state of the press in Malaysia ever since the recent government change. In particular, PDRM investigating Tashni for her reporting on the immigration issues. What do you think can be done to improve press freedom in Malaysia going forward?
Going forward, well, we were getting somewhere because our rating was going up. But now, I think the online media is still quite good. They do report quite well. But this treatment of reporters, you know, what they did to Tashni is appalling. You see, you strike fear into journalists. And luckily, the journalists here, I don't think are too frightened of all that. And people feel that we have just reversed back to pre-2018, May 9, 2018. We're back to where it was before. Because in the 2 years, we have actually gone up in the rankings for press freedom, you know, anti-corruption measures, and so on and so forth. And all of that is going to go away. So where the press is concerned, my suggestion to the press is to soldier on, because we will support a free press. And they must, it was a hard-fought freedom. They must keep pushing. And you see, one of the things that we wanted repealed was the, what do you call it? What we wanted repealed was the Printing Presses and Publications Act. And it never happened. So this whole licensing system carries on. And that is how they control the press. So unfortunately, that's also going to take a back seat. It's not going to happen very soon. Yeah.
Yes. So the next question comes from Nakiran, who'd like to ask you his question himself. So Nakiran, could you please come on?
Good evening, Dato.
Yes. Hi.
Dato. So it's more like asking your opinion about it. So speaking about the rights of the refugees, do you agree that having a parliamentary legislation such as the Indian Citizenship Amendment Act 2019, which provides a path to obtain citizenship for refugees and illegal immigrants, feasible for in the Malaysian context, like how India did for illegal immigrants by providing them citizenship? Will you think such measure for Malaysia will be feasible? Thank you, Dato.
I don't think it'll happen for a very long time. But let me tell you, the Indian legislation has a lot of problems, because they're picking and choosing. Okay, that's where the whole problem in India is taking place. But I think we need to. I mean, I have no problem looking at something like that. I must admit, I haven't thought about that. I have to be frank. I was only looking at it as looking at us as treating refugees according to international norms, because this displacement of human beings will keep on happening. So I'm not sure that is a solution, either a final solution, you know what I mean? And so sorry, I don't know enough about the legislation, but I do know that there's a lot of problems in India over it because of the way it's being implemented. So I would say first, comply with the international norms. Yeah, and I don't know much more about that act. I haven't studied that. Yeah, sorry.
Sure. No problem, Dato. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I'll think about it.
Thank you, Nakiran. Okay. So we also have a question from Naveen, who would like to ask you the question himself. So Naveen, could you please come on?
Good evening, Dato. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So my question is related to some past litigation you have pursued. So for instance, in 2011, you pursued a judicial review against the Home Minister's decision to declare Bersih as an illegal society. What I'm curious about is, what are some issues you face, if any, in pursuing litigation against decisions made by the executive? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question. Well, okay, we didn't actually face the problem with that. We actually won. When you go to court, you are generally left alone, to be honest, because you're pursuing your remedies. Whether you get the right decisions and the decisions that you hope will abide by the law is another issue altogether. So in fact, in the Bersih case, we did actually succeed. The two of the Bersih cases actually, in fact, we succeeded. When you're in court, there are no challenges. You do your case, you're heard, and the decision comes out. And I think where Bersih was concerned, we were very lucky that we had very, very, good judges, learned judges and experienced judges. So we did manage to succeed. So as I say, the court is a good forum for people to put forward these arguments. You must always articulate these arguments in accordance with the law. And I think, you will find that it gives rise to a body of law, which then you can fall back on later in other similar cases. So yeah, I hope I've answered your question there. Thank you.
Thank you, Naveen. So our next question comes from Amitesh. He asks, what do you think about the recent inconsistencies in prosecution of offenders of the MCO?
Oh, appalling. In fact, I don't even know why they're being charged in that fashion. Why is anybody going to jail, for goodness sakes? Okay, the jail sentences are ridiculous. They're excessive. And I can't understand why the AG's chambers are pushing it. And okay, the fines, yeah, maybe. The fines, maybe, okay? Because you want to enforce. But I would never have done it this way. I mean, I would have actually done it by educating. Obviously, they felt it necessary to enforce. That's the only way to keep people behind. Well, I'm not in agreement with that. So even if you want to enforce it, then you make sure that the sentences are reasonable, okay? And in many of the cases we noticed which were reported, they were innocent reasons. There were really genuine reasons. And yet the magistrate meting out these sentences didn't care. And then of course is the classic case of how some VIPs got treated extremely well, while ordinary Malaysians were not. Now this is where the courts come into the picture. And I think this is where they really need to stop feeling some fear or whatever it is, I don't know what it is, in respect of VIPs, because they must be treated in the same way. And I think actually in those cases, it is public pressure that brought them to be charged, which is why I'm saying we must never stop speaking up. Because if we keep speaking up and saying, we see you, we're watching, and we know exactly what you're doing, and you're not going to get away with it. We have to keep on the pressure, okay? It works sometimes. But of course, the sentences were different from one to the next, and that is not acceptable.
All right. And Grace Gunn asks, how long can the government delay in tabling the stimulus package in Parliament?
They shouldn't delay because the supply bill, it is an unusual expenditure. They need to put it before Parliament actually and get its approval. Otherwise, well, it's not legal in that sense. So they shouldn't. In fact, I'm expecting it to be there this round. It should be there this round because you can't keep spending without getting approval, because you have your budget. These are all off budget items, things that, come along the way. You must get parliamentary approval. So I don't know whether it's going to be put forward or not in the next Parliament.
But leading off of that, Doctor, would it be, does the government actually have unfettered discretion with regards to that? Or is it, is there some sort of control?
Oh yeah. I mean, the control comes in Parliament. You see, you cannot spend you have a budget. That's why you have a budget, because that allows the expenditure throughout the year. But if there's anything unusual outside the budget, you've got to go back to Parliament to get it approved. So that is where the transparency and all is, you see? Yeah, very important.
All right. Now, Sangeeta asks, what are your views on imposing a 30% quota for female representation in politics and government?
Oh yeah, quotas are not a bad thing. And I think because at least it brings it up to a minimum, okay? The previous government did very well with the women. They appointed many, many women to very leading posts. But of course, that's all gone now. Almost every single woman has been kicked out, and they brought someone else in who is a politician. So, but I am in favor of quotas so that you bring it up to to a certain level, okay? It doesn't necessarily ensure equality all around. It doesn't necessarily mean you see women in, for example, management positions, higher positions, okay? But hey, we got our first woman Chief Justice, you know, after how many years under the PH government. So, you know, these are good signs, and I hope it keeps going. But by the looks of it, where they've removed so many very talented women, I'm very concerned, actually. But yes, I am in favor of some quotas. There's no harm in it. People ignore quotas, by the way.
Very good. Okay, and our final question of this session comes from Ifa, Nazira, and Kentan, both asking about the same subject matter. Regarding the motion of no confidence that has recently been submitted, the motion of no confidence was rejected by the speaker. Do you think that any part of rejected by the speaker on the basis of Article 43? Do you think that any part of this article undermines democracy?
Okay, hold on. There's a factual issue there now.
Okay.
The press reported it wrongly. So the speaker issued a statement, and I read the whole statement. He rejected Dato Shafi Abdal's motion because that motion says we have confidence in Tun Mahathir. He rejected it. I don't agree with that. Okay. Then Tun Mahathir put in two motions. One is to do with the length of tenure of the speaker. And the second was the notice of no confidence motion of no confidence against the Prime Minister. The speaker disallowed the first one about himself, but allowed the motion of no confidence to proceed. So in fact, there is a motion of confidence before the House. Whether they get to discuss it in this parliamentary session or not, I don't know. But when you look at the federal constitution, I think the speaker also has to be very careful not to make judicial decisions, you know, in that sense, because that is for the judiciary. And I think people can raise these objections in Parliament if they want to, but by and large, you should let through such motions, no doubt about that. But in fact, he was wrongly quoted. He did allow the motion of no confidence to be put before the House. Whether it makes it on the 18th, I really don't know.
Okay, did not know that. Thank you for the correction. We also have a question, about the idea of local government elections. What do you think about the reintroduction of local government elections?
Oh, I completely agree with it. I completely agree with it because the appointments that are being made now, they're appointments, you know, the mayor, the this, the that. And local government affects all our lives down to the last thing, you know, our drains and key parts of our life is run by the local government. So to put cronies and put people there that you're rewarding and so on is not the way. So I am all for local council elections. I really think that it's time that we went that way.
All right, thank you, Doctor. And with that, we conclude our questions from the floor. So, Doctor, could you just let tell us about your general overview of the challenges that Malaysian democracy is currently facing?
Oh, I think we are facing many challenges, and in fact, within a period of 2-3 months with this MCO, and that's why I keep saying, look, they're behaving as if the MCO gives them some kind of immunity. There's no immunity, okay? We must still criticize them. But a lot of things they have done, they've reversed of what PH has done. And that's the tragedy, yeah? As I said, the appointments and all that. and the way they treat migrants, the way they treat the Rohingyas, all very, very different. So I think that it is, we have a huge challenge, but we cannot give up actually, because now we have made some gains. We should try and preserve those gains. And I'm hoping the opposition will step up. They've been quite silent as far as I can see. They need to, I think they're all in shock, but they need to get out of this shock and start putting this government on the line. Not taking out personal differences. That's what's happening. They're having spats. I'm not interested in their spats and fighting, and they don't like each other. I actually don't care. They need to question policies that are being made. Some of them are. So I am very concerned moving forward whether our reforms will ever see the light of day. We see the unraveling of some of the reforms that were introduced. So I am very, very concerned. Yeah, but you know, we have to do our bit and never give up. Never give up.
Dato, before we end the session, any final remarks that you'd like to share with us?
No, I think the future belongs to the youth. I wrote an article recently, and let me just tell you what I suggested. I suggested there that we must have a third force for the next elections, not to take over government, but to at least run and get some seats in government. And they must comprise people who are below 40 or 45. All right. We don't want any of the old faces. We don't want any, we want a fresh face who has new ideas, because I'm sure the youth are fed up of the toxic politics. I'm sure all of you are. We're tired of this person fighting with this person and the old style of thinking, you know, because you are all, you have access to the world. I mean, you're all, you know, computer literate, and you're so wonderful on social media. You know exactly what is going on around the world. Surely you're not interested in the pettiness of the politicians in our country. And we're not the only country who's having this. You can see it everywhere. You can see it in the United States. So I actually think a fresh face, a new group of people who are interested in going into parliament, as I say, not necessarily to change the government, but to take up some of the seats and maybe reclaim for yourselves the future. And one of the things you must fight for is our environment. Because right now, money seems to be more important. And if you noticed, in the 2 months of MCO, the air is less polluted. You can hear the birds chirping. Some of our rivers are cleaner. You have Panu returning to wherever, to our shores. You know, don't you want that for the rest of your lives? Whereas if you start with the factories spewing muck and toxic substances in our rivers, it starts again. So that's my call to the youth, actually. Reclaim the world. You can do it.
Thank you, Dato.
All
We
right.
hope so.
Yes.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this marks the end of our third Dialogues for 2020. And on behalf of the Law School, I would like to express our heartfelt thanks to Dato Ambiga for graciously honoring us today with her presence. Thank you to all of those who are present here today. But don't leave yet. I would like to pass the session on to Mr. Hamahinda.
Thank you very much, Dato, for that very scintillating talk and interesting insights that you gave.
Thank you.
And I hope that you will be able to make the time again for our students in future.
Sure.
And I'm sure our students enjoyed and staff enjoyed the session as much as I did. So thank you once again. I'll pass the floor back to Prashant to coordinate the online photography session.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting.
Yes, quite interesting. So, could everyone turn your videos on so that we can take a photo? All right. Yeah, I think, yeah. All good?
Have you got everyone?
I am checking to see if the photo has been taken.
Yes, I took the photos already.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Putri. So yeah, with that, thank you to all those who are present here today, and we hope you have a good day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. See you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Ambiga.
you so much.
Ambiga, thank
Thank
you.
you very
pleasure.
much, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Shall I